Awesome. I think we're on. I think we're good. Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Boykin, and I am excited to join SC Codes as the volunteer and community coordinator. This is my, I think third week with SC Codes. So I'm really excited to jump in with Mentor Mondays, but also jump in and get a chance to connect with all of you out there to let you know that I am here for you, here to connect you with SC Codes and hopefully connect with others out there who are looking for a way to be involved in this awesome movement that we're a part of here. So today we're going to keep going with our Mentor Monday series. So I'm really excited to introduce to you one of our volunteers, Drew Varner. If you were on our newsletter or saw our calendar invite, you know all about Drew and how much experience he brings to the table as far as tech goes, software engineering goes. So I think it's going to be a really great conversation for us to get some insight into him, insight into what he does, and also talk a little bit about how you can kind of make the most out of being a student or learner on the SC Codes platform. So without further ado, I will jump into introducing you to Drew, who is on with us. Drew has worked as a software engineer for the last 20 years. He specializes in functional program languages like Erlang, Elixir, and Reason ML. He founded 9FX, which is a small shop-focused software engineering and cybersecurity for federal customers. So with that, welcome, Drew. Thank you so much for joining us for a little bit today. I look forward to chatting with you. And please say hello to us and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Super. Morgan, first, thank you for having me. I'm from South Carolina, grew up here, went to high school at Lexington High School, and then ended up graduating from the University of South Carolina, both undergraduate and graduate programs. And my family and I live here in Columbia, my wife and my son. So I've been involved in software in one shape or another for the last 20 years. It's hardly like work for me. So I appreciate you having me, and I'm very excited to be part of the mentor here in the SC Codes program.
That is awesome. Well, you kind of jumped in a little bit to what I was going to start with. So a little bit about your educational background, and I would love if you could kind of dive into your background, your educational background, and then kind of how that morphed into the tech space.
Sure. I got sort of an unconventional start. I actually started out, I got an undergraduate degree in international studies, which is probably not the path that most people take to become a software engineer.
Yeah.
But when I was doing my undergraduate program studying international studies, I also started taking some courses in my minor in geographic information systems, right? Which is spatial databases, spatial analysis, computer mapping type applications. And that part of it I really enjoyed, right? And the GIS realm is interesting because even though it falls in the geography department, there's a lot of data, right, and a lot of computations there. So it obviously kind of goes, a lot of disciplines go hand in hand, right, with computer science, right, whether it be, math, physics, whatever else. And this was sort of the intersection of geography and computer science. And so I ended up taking classes in GIS. While in that program, I ended up I ended up going to get a master's in geographic information systems, or I started a program in that. And when I got into that program, I took a lot of computer science classes, right? Because, obviously to automate, GIS type events and stuff like that, it requires a knowledge of programming. You don't have to, right? But that is a sort of a tack you can take there. And so I took a lot of computer science classes there. I was in that program. I was fortunate enough to get something called a Fulbright scholarship to go study abroad for a year in the Middle East. And I had a project there where I actually decided to write my own internet map server. So again, that even though it was in a geography program, it put me pretty heavily into the coding world pretty quickly. I never actually ended up finishing up that master's in geography. I ended up transferring into the computer science program. Ended up graduating with a master's of engineering in computer science and computer enginering. I had a short break there. I went to Afghanistan for a year with the Army Reserves, but came back and finished that up. And so that's kind of my non-traditional path from, that's how you get from an international studies degree to computer science degree.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your service, first of all. And I always think it's so interesting to hear about kind of how these different paths lead you to what you're like most interested in or most passionate about. So what would you say, I guess, from that, what were skills from all of those different experiences that made you really successful now in your role?
So my take on developing software, coding, programming, stuff like that is a lot like cooking, right? In that part of it is just realizing that you can, right? There's some sort of common level in the beginning,
Love that.
where you get through your hello world program or figure out how to, to make a loop run or something like that. Those are all the basics. But at some point, right, that exposure to it sort of gives you the confidence that, like, not only I can do this problem set, but over here is something I haven't done before, and I know I can do that because of what I've done in the past, right? I feel like cooks have this, right? I feel like cooks have sort of, the courage to go try something new because, hey, I've been successful and built some sort of base in this in the past. And so that's what a lot of it was for me is I was fortunate enough to be able to have an independent project like a Fulbright scholarship to develop a project of my own, right? Which gives you that sort of independence and figuring it out. And then the most important thing is just exposure, right? I feel that there's a lot of people who, once they get introduced to programming, computer science, this sort of problem set, it becomes, something that's inherently interesting to them. And at that point, it just gets sort of easy, right? And I think the exposure, right? I was lucky to have kind of brushed up against this program in geography that brought me into the world of coding, right? And once I was in, there was no coming out.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing some of that background. I totally agree with you. And I think that a lot of the learners on our platform can connect with just having that courage to try something different and kind of excitement about jumping into something that may not be super familiar, but you've kind of done something sort of like it. So you think you can be successful at it. So I think that's fantastic. So I guess fast forwarding a little bit, I talked a little bit about your company, but I would love to hear, I guess, kind of a high level, what your company does, how you founded it, what you're working on now, kind of some things that you're excited about, just a total overview of what you do.
Absolutely. So part of where my company came from has a lot to do with sort of my professional background and where I came from in the job world. As soon as I had finished the graduate program in geography, I got picked up by a company called Oracle. They're a big software company, and I had a particular set of expertise around their spatial database. And so I went to work in their consulting arm. And after I got in there, because of my military background and also because of the background working with their stuff, I ended up in their sort of defense consulting practice. And that's where I spent sort of most of my professional career as an employee. I took a break from Oracle partially to go to Afghanistan and to come back and finish up that master's degree in computer science. When I came back, I went to work for another company called BEA, also really became a lot more focused on their defense practices, providing consulting services around software and a lot of coding, quite frankly, for defense and specialized agencies. And so having done that, I was kind of firmly rooted in the intersection between, software and defense. And so that kind of pointed me in the direction of my company now, right? Where the primary thing we do is provide software or software services, cybersecurity type services for defense organizations. U.S. federal agencies is our primary customer. And so for them, we can take a couple of different tacks, right? Sometimes we help a larger software company who needs to provide support, right? Again, that sort of intersection of the knowledge around a particular product plus the experience that we bring, partially that I bring from having to do the military background as part of it. Sometimes we'll take a system like we're doing right now with an Army customer where they've got a big piece of software that they own, but we sort of maintain it on their behalf, right, under their supervision. Right. So we're not writing new software for them, but we're maintaining an existing piece of software. And so that's the type of stuff we do. We're definitely trying to go more into the product side of things. And so that's our current sort of shift of direction. Well, we still do the services piece for sure. We're trying to get into the business of selling products eventually, but it's a long road with a lot of investment.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. And of course, I say this all the time, I'm learning so much about all these, the tech language and just kind of the tech space in general. So this is helpful for me. But I would love to know what, thinking back on before you started this awesome company, what would be some tips that you would give yourself now, like knowing what you know now, what would be some tips that you would give yourself um, based on your experience so far?
So I if I had to do it over again, I would have
Yeah.
become more involved in the community earlier. And
Hmm.
so somewhere around mid-career for me, I was working for that company called BEA, and I got invited to write a blog, for example, a technical article on their site about one of the products or whatever else. And I think there's a really fine line between what constitutes an expert sometimes in the software fields, right? I mean, you've got the person, okay, here's my entry level here, I'm just getting started. But the difference between the person who gives the talk and listens to the talk is probably inches and not miles, right?
Oh,
But
wow.
by getting out there and getting engaged, you know, and compared to when I was starting out, there's just so many different forums for it, right? I mean, once you get the sort of the basics under your belt and you figure out, okay, here's a direction or technology I want to go into, there's opportunities. In addition to SE codes, I sit in a number of chat rooms dedicated to specific languages, specific technologies, right? Or some tiny little slice of a particular technology, right? And sort
Sure.
of folks who are enthusiastic about it, because of the ubiquitous nature of the internet and all these collaboration tools we've got now, it's easier to form communities at lower cost, right? I used to buy a ton of
Hmm.
software books, and I still do occasionally, but I feel like there's so much out there now.
Yeah.
Uh, it's part of it. When I was off of the military, one time I spent like 5 years living in the Middle East after sort of taking a break from corporate America, and I got part of where I ended up was because I took some time off to do some open source development, right? To contribute to a community project and a technology I hadn't used before. And I was able to sort of take that experience, probably like some of your students use their portfolios, right? I suspect some of
Okay.
your students end up, hey, I've solved this problem and I've got a sample implementation here on GitHub, probably a similar type deal, right? And so I was able to take an example of that and kind of go into a new direction in industry based on that. So get out there in the community, right? Whether it be attending a software conference, whether it be talking at a software conference, writing a blog, getting involved in an open source project. There's lots of places there. And I figure the sooner you do it, right, the sooner you may rise above the crowd a little bit in terms of sort of getting noticed and getting to have generally interesting discussions and do cool work with people who like some of the same things you like.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And that is, or definitely in the same vein of kind of my next question of what opportunities do you see in the tech industry now? So I guess right off the bat would be that there's lots of opportunities to connect or lots of opportunities to get into the community to kind of get your feelers out there. But are there some other opportunities, maybe job specific or just specific opportunities that you see are just kind of like hot button places in the tech industry now that may be worth exploring for students who are on our platform and graduating from our platform?
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like there's definite areas there. I mean, one thing I think in terms of you're talking about like sort of changes and things moving in the industry, I
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
my background, right, working with Oracle and BA, I've lived in South Carolina, except when I've been overseas with the military and stuff, pretty much my entire life. But I've worked for companies that aren't here, right? And I think coronavirus, right? I don't think we're going back, right? We're certainly not going all the way back to the cube farm, right? And so
Yeah.
I feel like the idea that, hey, to do the coolest stuff, you have to be in the valley. You may need to work for a valley company, but you may not necessarily need to be there, right? I've done before I went one of my first contracts. My first two contracts were with commercial companies in Silicon Valley, and then actually both of them were, right. And so I feel like, particularly for SE Code students, right, it I don't know how it will be at first, but I don't know how important it is that about what the geographic job market of South Carolina is necessarily as the
Gotcha.
overall market, right? I mean, I feel like people are not just employees, right? But I think employers are saying,
Mm.
do I have to pay for that office space? Do I have to limit my search to either, let's say, to commuting radius, or for even some folks, in different areas, do I have to pay somebody to live in this very expensive area to do what I
Right.
need? So I feel like that is an emerging part of the industry. They're not necessarily an emerging, you know, um, discipline within computer science necessarily, but it's definitely a big change, right? That's very
Right.
timely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thinking about as we kind of adjust to this new normal of COVID and everything going along with it, what would you say as an employer, when you're hiring someone in this new climate, what are some things that are going to stand out to you? And it could be like COVID specific or just in general, when you're looking to have someone join your team, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for one of the things I like is somebody who's interested in something, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be what we're doing. And I'll give you an example. We had a contract for a long time up at the National Institutes of Health out of Maryland, right? We put an engineer there, and the work they were doing was primarily integration work. But I interviewed an engineer, and he's like, "I'm really into the Go programming language and distributed ledgers, blockchain style stuff. Not necessarily the currency side of it, but I'm into blockchain technology." And he talked about it, right? And like me, he's using his hands a lot, right? And so I was like, got it, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is something you're passionate about or whatever else. And even though we're not in this space, right? They, having, been exposed to technology, here's something that he can evangelize, right? And so I was, this is the type of person, the type of person I'm interested in is someone who says, let me tell you why I care about X, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. That is awesome. Um, and so, as a professional in the industry working now, what are some things that you do for like continuing ed? Like, how do you stay ahead of the curve, ahead of what's happening, and making sure that you're always forward thinking?
Um, so for me, I'm in a sort of a different spot than most folks as well. SC Codes, for example, offers a lot of cool course. I'm really excited about this new React program y'all have.
Yeah.
That's fantastic for me. I operate around a bunch of what I'd call low density languages, right? For example, I'm an Erlang developer. Chances are, if somebody else is an Erlang developer, if somebody says, "Hey, you're from Columbia, do you know so and so?" Probably not. If you ask me, there's another Erlang developer. Oh, you mean Todd? Yeah, we've been.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so I work in some of the smaller communities or of some languages that are probably, not necessarily up and coming, but interesting, right? And different tools solve different problems. And so I think that that's part of it makes it easier for me to engage in a community, right? And I've been fortunate enough to have a company, that's willing to say, hey, we'll pay you to go to this conference, and then we do the same thing, right? We send our folks up to the open source 101 locally. It's a fantastic deal. The Todd runs, for example, or all things open that he runs out of North Carolina. Go up there and listen to these leaders talk. That for me is part of what I like to do, right? And so.
Gotcha.
I find it difficult to engage in conferences in the time of COVID. Right? I don't maintain an attention span necessarily for some of this online content that's delivered for conferences, but I do go back and watch the YouTube videos later. I do like to stay involved, but for me, it's chat, right? And I'll be on chat with a friend of mine from San Francisco, an engineer out of Sweden, and who knows, right? And so,
oh wow,
and in our world, like in the open source world, I feel like I know people by their GitHub names and not their real world names, right? So there's a guy named Deadzen or whatever else, and I've known him as Deadzen for 2 years because that's his GitHub handle. But turns out he has a real name, right?
Who knew?
Yeah, right. So I kind of live in those communities, and that's what I do. Particularly in COVID, right? Whether you're in a Slack channel, a Discord channel, IRC, on a forum for a particular language, right? It's good. It's kind of good to get in there. And then so I've actually, I'll talk sometimes at software conferences. I'll speak at meetups, right? There's a great open source meetup in Columbia, South Carolina. So I've presented there before. They've got great content. There's an information security group called Colasec here in Columbia, right? A bunch of information security practitioners. Because of my military cyber background, I'll present there sometimes. And so, it's the step, right? Find the venues, listen, and then hopefully talk.
Awesome. Wonderful. Wonderful. Um, This is great. So, Drew, as we start to ask for some questions from our listeners, I would love to kind of know, um, of course, we all have these careers and we have lots of like technical parts and admin parts and things like that. But what's something or a moment or a happening, I guess, from your career so far that has made you like, this is it. This is what I love to do. Because I feel like you spoke to a little bit, um, spoke to this a little bit at the beginning, like hearing about what people are passionate about. But I'd love to know that for you. Like, when do you have those moments of like, I absolutely love doing this?
So for me, I've got a particular set of technologies I'm interested in, right? So I'm interested in stuff such as, I mentioned like functional programming languages, right? And even if you're not using that style of language, there's different ways about thinking of tackling problems, right? And, going back to the chef's example or whatever else, I would equate it to, some people are good on the grill, some people don't know how to bake, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And by the same token, right, it's interesting to get out there and use a different tool to solve a different problem. And there's a particular area I like, functional programming languages. They provide, certain values, and it's just a different way about a different way of thinking in order to tackle a problem. And so the parts for me that have been exciting is when I've been able to take some of these technologies I would be surprised to see applied, like in the federal space, which is not necessarily known for being forward-looking or not necessarily known for the bleeding edge, right? And being able to bring some cool technologies to bear on a problem, right? Sometimes for a proposal I've written, right? That for me is fun. We won an opportunity with the Navy through something called the Information Warfare Research Project, right? Pretty cool title. And
yeah, very cool.
We didn't
it sounds
know,
like you shouldn't be telling us it.
Yeah. And so, no, it's totally open. And so anyway, when I wrote the proposal, I didn't know anybody in it or anything like that. They're like, we really feel like you sort of had this approach, fleshed out, and we want to see where you go with it. So cool. And that for me was fun, right? To be able to bring sort of the market that I love and the people I like to serve. Obviously, as a veteran, I'm interested in, making sure that folks have the best technology to accomplish their job in that field, right? It's important to me. And being able to bring what I think are some interesting technologies to bear on these problems, that's just sort of the pinnacle for me.
That is fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your professional knowledge, but also that kind of personal look at what you do as well. And kind of going back to your connection with SC Codes. So you typically, if I'm getting this right, hang out on the Slack channel. So if anyone wants to connect with you or chat with you there, that is a place where they can reach you. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
In our mentor. Awesome. And if someone wanted to learn more about you, about 9FX, how would they do that?
Sure. I would just say reach out on the Slack channel, really.
Okay.
I'm sort of always there, right? If you ping me or whatever else, or at me or whatever else, we got a website. We encourage, we're not big on it now. Obviously, we don't have people drop by the office these days. It's not really it's not our MO these days. But before pre-COVID, people say, hey, I'm interested in this. Well, come by and let's talk about it. Let's draw on a whiteboard. We have lots of whiteboards here at the office, right? And obviously, as much as I talk with my hands, my handwriting is terrible. But you put a marker in them, and it'll end up on the board too. And that's it, right? And you'll see there's a group of us as well. There's a Columbia, South Carolina technology channel in Slack, right, for people in the space as well who are sort of more on the industry professional side, right? Some folks who are a little bit more seasoned. For a great venue for somebody who's trying to enter the market here, or somebody who's relocated here. And so Slack is kind of it, right?
Okay.
It's probably one of the best places.
Perfect. And I know that we are getting some questions in. So if you're okay with that, I will ask those to you. Let's see. What would you tell to someone who is too afraid to begin?
Lurk. So there's a lot you can do, right? I mean, so I talked about, sort of finding the venue, listening and then speaking, right? That's kind of a progression, whether it be at a meetup, whether it be at a software conference, whether it be in a forum, right? So just click and lurk, right? I mean, I had a similar deal, right? Before I moved into some of these technologies that are less popular. I remember earlier in my career, I looked at people who did these sort of languages. I was like, why do you want to be one of the 10 people who knows this, right? And so now I read a book for a while, listened for a while, and finally kind of jumped in, and that was it. So, if there's, any apprehension about starting or whatever else, just sit in the back and listen, right? And learn,
Mm.
I hope it's for you. Maybe it's not for you. I'm not sure. But for me, I always spend a lot of time in forums or reading or listening before I jump in, right? Because nobody wants to be wrong on the internet.
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
yeah.
but
We're all experts, doctors,
yeah,
everything these days.
indeed. And I really, same thing, right? First time I gave a talk at a large software conference in front of a bunch of people, I have a big feeling of an imposter syndrome, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
am I really an expert? Should I be talking about this? And you get juried into whatever the talk is, and you know. But I had a boss who once told me I worked in consulting for a huge portion of my life, where you're supposed to show up and be the expert. He says, "Look, the
Mhm.
difference is that the consultant reads the manual the night before." Yeah, but I mean, there's apprehension. I understand it, whether it's social apprehension, hey, do I even belong here? Whatever else, just show up in the
Yeah,
back, listen, and and then make the decision.
that's good. That is good. Um, let's see, we've got another one. I know we have a lot of veterans like yourself who are interested in getting started with programming. Is there a particular company or path you'd recommend for these folks?
So I don't. I didn't get there directly through a veteran specific program. So I'm not as knowledgeable on some of those resources.
Okay.
Anecdotally, I've heard that Syracuse has offered great programs. I don't understand. No, it's the University of Syracuse, but they used to have a great program to sort of provide certifications, right? In
Okay.
terms of getting, to getting out there, sort of, I don't know, boots to keyboards type thing. And I've known folks who've gone through those programs. I would definitely talk with, in terms of uh, the Veterans Administration. I don't have as much expertise on that. I can tell you that when you do, there are. I got hired one of my first jobs after being gone in the military for 5 years. So I really kind of like dropped a lot of skills, partially, because folks said, "Hey, you're a veteran, we're gonna give it a shot." Um,
Yeah.
but the Veterans Administration will provide could probably provide some pointers. Obviously, have things at your disposal, like the GI Bill is certainly a great deal in that respect. But I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there now online too, right? A lot of veterans are self-starters, right? In terms of to sort of kind of get out there and get it. But I'd look at the Veterans Administration for sure. If you're still on active duty, like for example, I still have an affiliation as an Army officer, and so when I'm out there wearing my Army hat and my Army role, we have a huge library of online educational resources that cover almost any programming language you can imagine through something called Skillport. I don't know what the equivalent is for other folks. Um, but definitely shop. I can tell you there's a huge, huge market for folks who have a background in software, cybersecurity, plus military background clearance. I mean,
Mm,
it can be a powerful combination for sure.
that's good. That's awesome. Thank you for that question and for sharing that information, Drew. Let's see. So I think we'll open it up, keep it open, I guess we should say, for a few more questions. But while we wait, Drew, could you explain your wonderful background? Because I think that needs to be discussed because it's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So this is I'm normally I believe I have Zoom open instead of Skype, and so this is just one of the first ones that came up as a background. Normally I use the one that says "This is fine," that has the coffee drinking dog
Oh,
in the room where everything's on fire. That's kind of my go-to standard. But this one kind of came up and was lighthearted. It was either this one or a high rise, and I didn't think anybody buy the high rise one, not the
no,
corner
that one
office.
is, I love it. It's in the lab in the tech space. That's so appropriate. Are there any other questions? And I know that we have dropped the Slack channel in the comments. So for those of you who are students, learners, interested, definitely join our Slack channel and connect with me there as well. Let's see. I think we have another question coming in. What would you tell to someone who is interested in mentoring or working with SC codes, but maybe on the fence?
2 points to it. I mean, on the fence, there can be a couple of reasons you're on the fence, right? I understand what it's like to have have a lot of time commitments, for example, right? I've got my Army Reserve job, I've got to run a company, I've got, a family, I've got a 4-year-old son. I have a very dangerous hobby of electric skateboards, right? So, so I understand what it's like to have a lot of time commitments. But again, right, lurking doesn't cost anything, right? To lurk in the mentor channel or whatever else. If the question is, hey, I don't know if I can provide value, that one's easy, right? Fill out the application and let someone else decide, right? I think it's easy. It's probably easier for someone to say, hey, yeah, we think you can bring something to the table. Myself, for example, I don't work in a lot of the languages that SC Codes teaches necessarily. I mean, I've got a background in them over my 20 years, but still, I'm interested in it, right? Partially for selfish reasons. A rising tide lifts all boats, and in this case, as there's, as the community of folks interested in software development in South Carolina improves, right? Folks like me who are here and doing business here, right? It creates more potential employees. It creates a better community of interest. It creates more opportunities, right? So I'm interested in it from that perspective, right? For selfish reasons, as well as the fact that I like the technology. And so why not? It would be sort of my response. What's the worst that can happen?
I love that. I love that. Why not? Definitely. And I'll echo that. And I would love to chat with you if you're thinking about joining SC Codes. And we'll definitely say we can find a place for you anywhere. I think if you want to hang out on the channel or lead a class or serve as a resource in any other spot, I would agree. Why not? We can definitely use your expertise somewhere. Perfect. Any other questions from our viewers or anything else, Drew, that you'd like to add or throw out there?
No, I appreciate you having me. I definitely enjoy being part of the community, and I just say, check out some of the other resources across the state too. I've been to a functional programming meetup. I've driven down to Charleston to go to one because they were talking about my language, Erlang, right? So I went down. Great opportunities in Greenville, all over. So, I know it's tougher during COVID, right? But networking, Slack, forums, and stuff like that. A technology community. Yeah, obviously it's about technology, but half of it's community, right? And I'd encourage people to sort of kind of, as they move forward, figure out, here we are, and I want to be part of that community, and that's what I would encourage, right? The technology, you'll figure that out as you go.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us, spending a little bit of your evening with us, explaining your awesome background, and truly just giving us a little more insight into what you do and ways to get started in this tech journey. I definitely appreciate it, and I know our community does as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me, Morgan.
All right. We will see you soon, Drew. We'll see you on the Slack channel for sure.